So I'm here to make this video to explain what happens when we have Mars in the 5th house in your birth chart. So, what is the 5th house? The 5th house represents gambling, children, romance, individual, creative, fun, hobbies, and all that good stuff. It also is a house that's associated with education and learning and researching astrology and all that good stuff. So, what is Mars? Mars represents brothers, male friends. It represents fighting, aggression, fire, weapons, debts, losses, loans, blood, energy, and that's just about it. So what happens when you put these two together? One thing that you might see with Mars in the 5th house is a potential that an individual might get an abortion or miscarry with their first kid, because the 5th house represents children, but it particularly represents the first kid. Now, this doesn't just necessarily mean that just simply having Mars in the 5th house can give a miscarriage, because there would have to be other influences to show that. But there is a potential, though, with just Mars sitting there, that person could be more inclined to a miscarriage or something when it comes to their first kid. Mars in the 5th house can show someone who has an interest, and maybe a whole bunch of have a great interest in participating in sports, because Mars is that athletic, masculine energy and stuff. So Mars in the 5th house, the 5th house being creative expression, you could have an interest in expressing yourself through a lot of sports and athletic activities and ventures and stuff, with Mars coming into the 5th house. Mars being in the 5th house might give you some interest in academic pursuits, especially if it's sitting with, a planet like Jupiter and Mercury, or if it's aspected by Jupiter and Mercury. The Mars can really be more driven and focused to maybe academical pursuits of Mars in the 5th house. Mars, it has aspects in Vedic astrology. It aspects the 4th, 7th, and 8th house from itself. So Mars, with its 4th aspect, it looks at the 8th house, and the 8th house is with sex and death and all that stuff. So Mars in the 5th house can naturally make someone very sexual with this placement. Mars in the 5th house can make someone very inclined to want to, dive into mysticism. Their energy can be driven to wanting to research and dig into learning about astrology, tarot, and Reiki healing, and all that good stuff. And then Mars, it looks at the 12th house. So Mars being in the 12th house, this is a person who might be inclined to maybe wanting to travel a lot, or this could be someone who is, the 12th house can also be sort of spiritual and creative and intuitive, and I don't know. I just feel as though with Mars being in the house, the 5th house of, creative self-expression, and the 12th house being this very intuitive spiritual house, and it's looking at it, this might be someone who might find some creative, artistic ways to express himself. And with Mars representing like tools and stuff and weapons, this might be someone who might be like a great sculptor, or maybe a great artist or something, or someone who might just, I can't even come up with a great example, all type of weird stuff. Someone who might craft and make figures out of marble, or sculpt things with a goddamn chainsaw while hacking away at some wood and just sculpt things. They might get real creative with their self-expression and make it into something very artistic and unique, with Mars being in the 5th house. But yeah, that's just about it. Mars looks at the 11th house from the 5th house. So the 11th house represents large social network circles, organizations, and gains. So a person with Mars in the 5th house naturally be very driven towards making financial gains off of their skills. So if it's sports, they'll be very driven to wanting to make financial gains through their academics and sports, or with their academical approaches, or their cult interests. They might be very driven to want to make gains with that. But that's basically it. Mars in the fifth house is just a rather simple placement. Mars in the fifth house might be real prone to gambling a lot. So, because the fifth house is associated with gambling, and Mars is also sort of debts and losses. So, one of the negative potentials that you might see with Mars in the fifth house is that this person might be prone to losing a lot of money with gambling, or they might suddenly win a lot of money because it's looking at the 11th house, and the 11th house is large gains, and then they might gamble their large winnings thinking that they're going to get more money, and they end up losing it all. And then Mars is, with it looking at the 12th house, and the 12th house also represents loss, and Mars is a significant of debts and loss, and the 12th house is a house of secrecy, and the 8th house is a house of sex and death and secrecy, and it's a sexual house, like I said, and it's sitting in the house of children. You gotta connect all these dots together. I know it's a lot. This person could probably be very prone to maybe having hidden sexual affairs and encounters, or having a kid outside of a marriage, outside of a relationship. That might be something that's very possible to happen with Mars sitting in the fifth house and looking at the 8th and looking at the 12th. But that's basically all I can think of in the moment with what happens when you have Mars in the fifth house in your birth chart. Hope this gave you some good insight and clarity on what to expect when you have Mars in the fifth house, and thank you for watching.